This story follows a teacher whose professional boundaries begin to blur when he becomes unusually fascinated by one of his adult students. The story begins with Cairo, a young college student whose parents live in another country. Living mostly on her own in a quiet, isolated house, Cairo spends much of her time writing. One day, she arrives at class and meets Jonathan Miller, a middle-aged teacher who once dreamed of becoming a successful writer, but eventually settled into teaching. Jonathan gives Cairo a list of books from the syllabus and asks her to read them. But to his surprise, Cairo has already read all of them. Soon, another student named Winnie arrives. She is also Cairo's close friend, and the two head out to grab something to eat. Meanwhile, Jonathan notices that Cairo has an unusual book among her belongings. His friend Boris happens to stop by, and the two men are surprised when they discover that Cairo also owns a copy of one of Jonathan's books. That night, Jonathan's wife, Beatrice, is busy with work. Wanting to get her attention, Jonathan casually tells her that one of his students was reading his book. But before they can spend much time together, Beatrice gets another work call. The next day, Jonathan tells Boris about everything that has been happening, and Boris jokes about the situation. Then they notice Cairo walking toward the school through the woods. Jonathan watches her closely and asks whether she is ever afraid walking through those woods alone. Cairo simply smiles and tells him that the most frightening thing in those woods is probably her. Jonathan laughs, but clearly Cairo's confidence has caught his attention. At school, Winnie deliberately drops her books in front of Boris just to get his attention. Boris immediately realizes what she is doing and asks her what she wants. Winnie keeps teasing him, and Cairo notices the whole thing. She jokingly tells Winnie that she's completely crazy. Later, Cairo and Winnie go to Cairo's house. Cairo is struggling with a college application question asking her to describe the greatest achievement of her life. They brainstorm several ideas, but nothing feels special enough. Then Winnie jokingly suggests that Cairo could write about having a complicated relationship with her teacher. Cairo points out that Jonathan is around 20 years older than her, but Winnie keeps encouraging the idea. She starts talking about how Jonathan seems to notice Cairo during class and how he pays attention to her writing. Cairo begins to look at Jonathan differently. The next day, she starts watching him more closely during class. Afterward, Jonathan asks her to stay behind. Later, Jonathan invites Boris to dinner, but Boris leaves after joking around with a silly dance move. Jonathan tries copying the move himself, only to realize that Cairo has walked in. They both laugh and brush it off. Jonathan is genuinely impressed by one of Cairo's assignments. In fact, he remembers several lines from it almost word for word. Cairo is thrilled that her teacher actually paid such close attention to her work. Jonathan then gives her another challenge. He asks her to write a short story inspired by the style of one of her favorite authors. If she does well, he promises to give her full credit on the midterm assignment. Cairo immediately agrees. She then surprises Jonathan by revealing that she has also read his book. Even more surprising, she can remember several passages from his writing almost perfectly. Jonathan is impressed by how closely she has studied his work. He invites her to meet him over the weekend so they can discuss her assignment. That evening, Jonathan, Beatrice, and Boris go out for dinner. Winnie happens to be working there. Beatrice notices that Jonathan seems unusually interested in Cairo and immediately becomes suspicious. She starts criticizing Jonathan in front of Boris, telling him that he has lost the writer he used to be. She reminds him that he hasn't written anything meaningful in years and says that he's become nothing more than an ordinary teacher. The weekend arrives, and Cairo goes to the place Jonathan recommended. Jonathan eventually joins her. A man nearby begins performing poetry, and while Jonathan listens carefully, Cairo keeps watching. Afterward, Cairo and Jonathan continue talking outside, and their connection becomes increasingly complicated. The next day, Cairo shows up to class dressed differently than usual, clearly trying to get Jonathan's attention. Boris notices the tension between them but doesn't get a straight answer. Cairo and Jonathan talk again about her favorite author and the story she plans to write. Jonathan is in a hurry to leave, so he agrees to her idea without thinking too much about it. Meanwhile, Winnie continues teasing Cairo about her obvious interest in Jonathan. Then Boris arrives and Winnie starts teasing him too. During all the confusion, Cairo realizes that her phone is missing. At the same time, Jonathan discovers that he accidentally took Cairo's phone with him. Since his plans with Beatrice have already fallen through, Jonathan decides to return the phone to Cairo. When he reaches her house, it begins to rain. Cairo comes outside, and the tension between them reaches a breaking point. They share a brief kiss before Jonathan immediately leaves and returns home. Later, Cairo sends Jonathan her completed story. Jonathan goes somewhere quiet to read it, but the story is far more personal than he expected. It is written as a provocative fictional story about a teacher and a student, with obvious parallels to the growing tension between Cairo and Jonathan. Jonathan becomes visibly uncomfortable because he realizes that Cairo may have been using their real-life interactions as inspiration. The next morning, everything changes. Jonathan no longer treats Cairo the way he did before. Cairo asks him what happened. Jonathan tells her that he disliked the story because it crossed several boundaries. When Cairo points out that the story is clearly inspired by the two of them, Jonathan firmly denies that anything happened between them. He tells her that they are simply a teacher and student, and that nothing more can exist between them. Cairo is devastated. Jonathan then tells her that she needs to rewrite the assignment or risk failing the midterm. Cairo becomes furious. She argues that her story is excellent and accuses Jonathan of being afraid because she accomplished something he never never could. She even calls him an ordinary writer and challenges him to fail her if he has the courage. Cairo leaves in tears and later spends the evening with Winnie. Meanwhile, Jonathan is clearly stressed about everything that has happened. When Beatrice asks what is wrong, Jonathan finally tells her about Cairo's story. Beatrice becomes curious after hearing about it, but before they can discuss it further, Boris arrives. At the same time, Cairo tells Winnie that she now believes Jonathan was only pretending to care about her writing. Wanting to distract herself, Cairo encourages Winnie to message Boris. Winnie tries to get Boris's attention, but he remains focused on the bigger situation. As tensions continue to rise, Cairo makes another reckless decision that pushes the situation even further. Soon, the consequences reach Jonathan's personal life. Jonathan's school contacts Beatrice, and she learns that something serious has been happening between her husband and one of his students. She is shocked that a student's writing assignment has caused so much trouble. Beatrice asks Jonathan directly whether anything actually happened between him and Cairo. Jonathan denies it, but his hesitation makes her even more suspicious. The next day, Cairo doesn't return to class. Instead, she is called into the vice principal's office alongside Jonathan. The vice principal asks both of them to explain exactly what has been happening. Cairo tells her side of the story. She explains that Jonathan gave her special attention, discussed the assignment with her outside class, met her away from school, and crossed professional boundaries. When it is Jonathan's turn to answer, he struggles to explain himself. The vice principal notices his hesitation and makes her decision. Jonathan is suspended from his teaching position. Outside the office, Boris tries to make Jonathan understand what went wrong. He tells him that he should have known where the professional boundaries were and that crossing them has now cost him his career. Jonathan returns home and tells Beatrice that he has lost his job, but Beatrice is no longer willing to simply accept his explanation. She asks him one more time whether his feelings for Cairo became more than they should have. Jonathan still denies it. Their argument becomes increasingly bitter as both of them start pointing out the problems in their marriage. Eventually, Beatrice decides that she wants a divorce. Meanwhile, Winnie confronts Cairo. She tells her that her actions could have serious consequences for Jonathan's career, but Cairo no longer seems concerned. Instead, she believes Jonathan underestimated her. She says that now he will finally understand what she is capable of. Cairo considers everything that happened to be the greatest achievement of her life. And with that, the story ends on a disturbing question. Now that Jonathan has lost his job, his reputation, and possibly his marriage, will he finally be able to become the writer he always wanted to be? And more importantly, was Cairo's entire plan really about writing a story, or was she trying to prove something to Jonathan all along? And that's where Miller's Girl comes to an end.